brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between Climate Consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climate Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climate Consulting. In this one, I speak to behavioural science expert and international public speaker on the power of persuasion, Paul Craven. Paul and I were introduced by one of our clients, Ben McGrail at Ex Materia, off the back of a conversation that Ben and I were having all about the power of behavioural science for consultancies. I had been telling Ben about how much I'd taken from Robert Cialdini's influence, and Ben, knowing Paul's involvement with the Cialdini Behavioural Science Institute, said, "You have to speak to Paul." And as they say, the rest is history. In this episode, Paul and I dive into the practical behavioral science approaches that you can use in your consultancy to help you build stronger relationships, sell more effectively, and influence decisions in a way that land with your clients. This is an in-depth conversation and an in-depth look at some of the key principles that will help you to grow your practice, your firm, and your career, all backed by clear academic research. And the best part is almost everything that Paul talks through on this interview is completely free for you to do. And many of these behavioral science approaches are things that you can start implementing as soon as tomorrow. I would definitely recommend getting your notebook out for this one. You are going to want to take plenty of notes so that you can take those learnings from Paul to implement in your consultancy, in your client work straight away. And so with that recommendation given, with the intro done, all that's left to say is please enjoy today's conversation with Paul Craven. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, not at all. I'm very excited for this. I know we've had quite a lot of conversation already that I'm sure is going to come out, but I want to start for our listeners and for our viewers today. It'd be great if you could, just for their benefit, share a little bit on your background and how you got to where you are today.
Right. Well, my name is Paul Craven, and I had a 27-year career working in the City of London, working for 3 firms at Schroders, PIMCO and Goldman Sachs, largely on the sales and marketing side, distribution side, although I did some investment management in my earlier years, which we may come back to later because we have lots of behavioural biases when it comes to investment. And then in 2014, I started my own behavioural science business, essentially talking and trying to teach people about it. I'd always been interested in behavioural science for a considerable time. And I just felt that behavioural science, how real people make real decisions in the real world, which is my favourite definition of it, how it can impact you and how it can help us make decisions. Because, of course, human beings are always thought to be, rational, evidence-based, analytical, and they can be, all those good things. But what studying behavioral science has taught me, and hopefully I've passed some of these insights on, is actually how real people make real decisions in the real world isn't just about the theory. It's about in practice, they do behave differently. They do make mental shortcuts. So that's really where I am here in 2025, and thoroughly enjoying doing speeches and internal training on the subject.
Well, and this is why I'm very excited for today. Our mutual friend, Ben from Ex Materia, obviously said, must get you on. He loves everything you talk about. And as we've talked about over lunch, behavioural science is something that I've gone very deep in. And so when I learned you were associated with the Cialdini Institute and everything that comes with that, it was really keen to talk it through. And I guess, Paul, maybe you mentioned behavioural science has been something that's gone through your life, and more so you can decide where we start. I remember when we spoke ahead of this, you mentioned how you'd grown up in a pub and there was behavioural science in that. You are a magician and all of the behavioural science that comes with that, and obviously your career in the city. I'd love to know where, maybe it's a thread that goes all through, but where did that first interest or intrigue in behaviour come from?
I think looking back, it probably was growing up in a village pub in Wiltshire. My dad ran a pub called the Packholson in Corsham, and I was sort of a young teenager in those days, and we were there for a number of years. And actually, I began to just appreciate how much you could learn from, I'll call it people watching, and people, how do you behave? And of course, in a pub, there's lots of community, there's lots of good stuff, there's lots of sharing, lots of conversations. There's the occasional problem, the occasional challenge. And watching my father, for example, how would he deal with issues if someone got a bit drunk or a bit bad-tempered? And I learned, I think, an awful lot about that without knowing what to call it. And years later, of course, I watched people make investment mistakes when they're managing their money in the stock markets. I watch people do good and bad things as part of the teams they're in the office. I watch what really, I think I tried to learn over the years, what makes a successful business, whether it be an asset manager, a consultancy, an advisor. And there were certain patterns and themes coming forward. And ultimately it came back to this idea of, well, how do people really make decisions? And once you recognize that, I think it gives you insights on how to make better decisions going forward. And that's really how it started. And you asked about magic. I mean, I've done magic for many years in my life. I love it. I'm not a professional magician, but I've certainly been studying it, the old books. I perform a lot. And of course, what we're dealing with as a magician is how do human minds work? And lots of interesting things about magic that I've learned as a magician about how to work with audiences. Someone once joked there were thinking audiences and there were drinking audiences. So you've got to tailor your show accordingly.
What do you give the different audiences? I've got to ask.
Well, when they're a drinking audience, which tends to mean it's later on in the evening when you do something, you have to do stuff that's more visual and have a quicker impact. If you have more of a thinking audience, and I'm obviously generalizing a little bit here, you can do stuff that's a bit more cerebral, can be a bit more procedural. Now, ultimately, as a magician, what you want to do is for people to be entertained. You want to create a sense of wonder. And of course, it's that sense of wonder that as a magician that I have myself when I learn about how the human mind works in business or investment or in consulting. And for me, they're joined around the back of the circle. It's how the mind really works. People talk about, magicians, it's all about misdirection. No, it's not. It's about direction. People say, the hand is quicker than the eye. No, it's not. It's just the eye sees it, but the brain can't process it quickly enough. And so there's lots of neurological type aspects to magic, which I think are related to what I love doing as a business.
I think the point around the thinking and drinking audience is fascinating because, and hold with me here, because actually to your point around how this plays out in business, and you mentioned how your career was in sales and marketing, client relationships, and ultimately our audience here is consultancies, what Ben and his team do, for instance. It all comes back to clients. And that is everything from getting them to buy your consultancy because they're speaking to multiple, to actually how you work with them. And I imagine actually in business, there are thinking and drinking audiences. And I wonder whether it's the same analogy or whether it's a different, how you break those up, because I think that starts to bring us into actually how you use the science of behavior to help with those relationships.
Yeah, I wouldn't go up to a client and say you're a thinking or a drinking client, but
but you'll know which ones are which.
You tend to know. Yeah, you're right. But perhaps this is where the idea of the sorts of people you deal with are they more transactional or are they more relationship orientated? That might be a good way of dividing people up, I think, if we're going to choose a binary choice. And I've always thought that what behavioral science can help do better Yes, it can help you get the transactions you require in your business. Very important. But actually, I've found out, and I think I've increasingly found this out, Nick, over the years, is that actually where I think it's true of wisdom comes from is, can you use it? And you mentioned I've been in sales and marketing all my life. Can you use it to build better relationships? Because ultimately, if you can build good relationships in business, then you have a better chance of being long-term profitable, and you have a better chance of being trusted. And liking leads to trust, leads to long-term relationships. That's kind of the stepping stones, if you like, to, I think, long-term business success. And again, just looking back on my career, I would say that the most successful business people have been more relationship orientated. The transaction boys and girls get the glory in the short term, very important, as I said earlier. But actually, the really successful companies build a relationship with their clients, in whatever business you're doing. And I've used behavioral science in recent years. I used to, when I first started sort of talking about it and giving keynotes on it, there are a lot of ways you can go. I can talk to investment audiences about investment biases. I could talk to boards about how to construct a board using the right blend of personalities and people so that you actually communicate and connect with each other. Very useful thing as well, particularly if you're, say, a non-executive director or something, and you want training in that. In the last few years, well, I've come to regard its most useful perspective, as far as I'm concerned, and indeed of the people I talk to about it is how can we be more influential and persuasive? Now just think about it. Influence and persuasion, it's something we all do all the time. You don't have to be a salesperson in a sales job to require to be influential and persuasive. You want to work with your colleagues. Well, being more influential is pretty helpful. You want to work with your clients. Well, being more influential is pretty important there. You want to put your kids to bed on time, 8:00 in the evening. Being more influential and persuasive is helpful there. You want to negotiate a good deal. And so where I've tried to sort of really focus it as like a prism focus of behavioral science is working on this idea of influence and persuasion. And I should say up front here, just in case it gets confused with the magic thing here, this is not about mind control. This is not about some sort of hypnotic control over the other person. This is about ethical influence and persuasion. And indeed, if both parties in a transaction or in a relationship walk away thinking that they've lost out, that's a bad piece of influence and persuasion in my book. That's unethical. I want to really offer insights into how both parties can walk away and both feel they've had a good deal, honestly, correctly, which will mean they'll come back together again and do another one, which is where your relationship builds out of successive transactions. And so that for me, and the way I got into it, I think was, well, actually it was years and years ago. I met Robert Cialdini, and I read his book a long time ago, his famous book, Influence, which was originally written in 1984, but I read it, I think, in the mid-90s. And then I reread it in the 2000s. And in fact, when my friend Rory Sutherland introduced me to Bob Cialdini, it was about 10, 12 years ago, he said, before there was behavioral science, before there was Kahneman Tversky, there was Robert Cialdini. Because this book was written in the 80s, before behavioral science became a fashionable thing. And what Bob's book is about, and I'm hoping that some of your listeners will go out and buy it if they haven't read it already, but I think it's the greatest book on sales, marketing, relationships, persuasion that's ever been written. What Bob did was, as an academic at the University of Arizona, he's a professor of psychology. Why I think this book has extraordinary insights is because he doesn't just write it as an academic theoretician. He actually went out incognito, dare I say, and worked, I think it was with some car firms, some insurance companies, I think maybe a legal firm was in there, but various different businesses. And he wanted to see what really worked in practice between a company and a client, or a salesperson and a client. And in the end, taking all his experience undercover over a number of years with his academic credentials as a professor of psychology, he ended up codifying the science of persuasion. I think it's an art to it as well, but the art and science of persuasion, let's call it that, into 7 principles of persuasion. He essentially said there are 7 really good ways that you can ethically use to make your argument more persuasive, more influential. And I became hooked on the book. I used it a lot in my career. I found it invaluable, what it did for me. And now I joined the Cialdini Institute about 3 or 4 years ago, and gave me access to a lot more of his research over the years. I've got to speak to him quite a few times, been trained by him. And I really want to sort of try and help people with showing them some of these ideas, because I think they are absolute gold dust in business. And as I say, not just in business, but in your personal life as well.
Well, and having read the book, and I actually only, Paul, found it, I think it was probably about 2018. I've then since gifted it to all of my team. And I do, like you, I think everyone should read it. I'm also, for today's conversation, very conscious that it is a big book and there is a lot we could cover. And so I think for us today, our challenge is how do we focus that for our audience? And I wonder, to your point of long-term relationships, because if I think about our audience as consultants, they all want to, whether, to your point, you are growing inside an organization and you want to build relationships in your firm, whether you are more senior or you're running your own shop and you want to be winning client business, you want to build relationships with clients. Ultimately, everything comes back to that. It's a relationship business. And so I wonder if that's where we start, and we'll see how long we have to go, because I've taken some of the pricing principles, some of the, to your point, how to help your kids get to bed on time. There's so much. But I'd love to maybe start there from your experience, from the work with Cialdini. If our audience, maybe we start, they haven't got any relationships, how can they go out? What are the things they should be thinking about to actually start building some of those?
I think before we move on to the relationships, it's worth just highlighting the fact that there are probably 3 foundations to being more successful when it comes to influence and persuasion. Relationships is very much a foundation stone, no doubt about it. But I think you can have a good relationship with someone, but you've still got to remove their uncertainties. So, for example, if we have a good relationship, but I'm trying to sell you something, you might say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? It's got nothing to do with our relationships per se. You will have uncertainties about the product. So I would say the second pillar is how do you reduce uncertainties? And finally, how do I actually motivate you to action? So those are really the 3 things. Now, here's the thing. If you want to promote an idea, a product, something, you don't have to do all 3. You don't have to tick all 3 boxes. It's certainly pretty good if you do. And they don't necessarily follow in that order, because there are some principles that work better with motivating action immediately. But it's pretty helpful if you want to build up the long-term business with somebody to have all 3 tools, if you like, in your armory. So yeah, but I think cultivating relationships is really the foundation of them all.
Well, and I think it's a great grouping, because also if I think along the sales process in consulting, it's long tail, it's complex. And I think, to your point, Paul, it starts with the relationship. If you don't know I exist, you won't even talk to me. Actually, if I am particularly, a lot of our listeners are running firms that are not global brands. And so if you are not known, how do you build, let's say, trust to overcome that uncertainty? And then, to your point, particularly in today's economy, budgets are tight, people aren't spending, we joked at lunch about people taking flowers out of the receptions, actually how you motivate to action. I think what we've nicely covered is how you go from not knowing someone to helping them choose you or deciding you are right. To your point, they have to decide. And maybe why don't we work through those? And I think that will give our audience something they can, in each step, apply. Where do we start, though? I don't want to assume you start with relationship. It feels obvious, but I will be led by you.
Let's think of it in these terms. Cialdini has 7 principles, and it's fair to say that of those 3 different blocks I talked about, the cultivating relationships has the foundation, if you like, has 3 principles, the reducing uncertainty, 2 principles, and then the motivating to action, 2 principles. So why don't we just go through some of those and just think, we won't have time to go through all 7 today, but I think it's quite an interesting place to start. So let's look at one of the first principles, which is that of liking, which is the ultimate starting point for building a relationship. And again, please, when you sort of think about this, you can think about it in business terms, but think about it in personal terms as well, because it applies equally. And that's why I think this thing is so authentic. There's a golden rule in sales, which is often forgotten, is that you need to like your client almost before they like you. And there's a wonderful story about a US car salesperson. I think he won Salesperson of the Year for decades in a row, called Joe Girard. And Cialdini, he's in the Cialdini book, but I've found out a lot more about him since reading the originally in the book. And Joe Girard's success as a car salesperson, he did a number of things, and I can't go through them all, but a couple of things that to emphasize his liking principle. The first thing, when he was a young salesperson, if someone walked into his car showroom, and he was just one of a number of members of staff, he would walk out and greet them, and obviously be very friendly and shake hands and eye contact and all those things that we kind of know about. Start off in a friendly way with a big smile. You'd be amazed, by the way, how many receptionists don't smile when you walk in. What a mistake. Please train your receptionist when you walk into an office to smile. It makes such a difference the way you go in. I digress. Joe Girard meets and greets a customer. And what's he thinking? Now, you may say, well, how do I sell them this car? No, he didn't think that. His underlying thought when he greets somebody is not how I sell them a car. It's how do I sell them their second car? He's thinking about that relationship straight away. He's getting to know them. He's asking them questions. He's getting to like them. But he's thinking, I've got to sell them a really good car to get the second car. Now, once you get into that mindset, and it goes back to what we started earlier, you're becoming much less transactional and much more relationship orientated. And I often think that in business, I wish I'd thought about that. And not how do I win this client mandate? How do I win the second client mandate off them? And it's a mindset. And I think that's quite a good way of thinking about it. You see this all over the place. How can I be more human? And I think this is where these principles are so good because, as I say, they're based on lots of scientific research. But I think what they reflect above all else is our humanity. And I don't want to sound too sort of waffly or apple pie and motherhood or anything like that. But actually, I think when we connect with somebody, human to human, we have a big advantage of something that's just done from machine to machine. And so even when I see things like websites, the first thing I do when I look at a website of a business, I'm intrigued by what the landing page is and how friendly is it. Now, you may say, well, Paul, what are you talking about? Well, there have been studies done on this. There was one done a few years ago where they looked at 6,700 websites. And I think that they did A/B tests. In other words, you'd get live screens and you would try different landing pages. So very similar. You'd add, I think that up to 29 factors. They looked at 29 factors. There might be colors, might be fonts, might be what the message says. And they found that of the 29 things they could change, and they tested with A/B tests, so whether something works or not with clients, what worked. And why I like this particular study was that it was actually all related to revenue per click. So it was a real thing. It wasn't just an academic thing. It was how many customers came to the landing page and then moved on and ended up buying something. So this is real life stuff. And only 8 of the 29 factors they changed on the landing page made a difference to revenue per click. And of those 8, most of them are behavioural factors, things like scarcity, social proof, the stuff that the Cialdini principles are, which is amazing. So the behavioural stuff mattered more than the sort of the bells and whistles, if you like. One that came up that I thought was extraordinary. And if you want to change your website for practically nothing and make a big difference to how you're perceived, do what this survey showed you. Increase your liking, increase the way you're perceived. And it's about human interaction. Look, I know I'm on a machine, I'm on a screen, but how can I make it more human for that first moment of greeting? And one of the factors that helped, that worked, that had a positive impact was a welcome page, a welcome message. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't be just, hello, welcome to this page here. My name, look at the Cialdini website. My name is Robert Cialdini. I'm here to do this for you. How can I help? And possibly a photo or something human. And just by putting that in, you can increase the way your company is perceived. But instead, what most companies do is they sort of start talking about what they do, their history, how big they are, a map of the world, where their offices are. Could be a number of things. That's all good stuff and useful. I'm not saying don't do that. But start off with a greeting. And it makes a difference. And we have the data to prove it. That's the liking principle in action as part of technology.
If you are enjoying this episode so far, I have one small ask. I would massively appreciate if you could open your phone right now, hit share, and send this to someone in your network, one of your friends, one of your colleagues, one of your clients who you think would benefit from this interview. This podcast only runs because of you and because of the value you get from it. And it means so much to me to broaden that reach so we can help more consultants to climb in consulting. So please hit that share, send it to a friend, and I'm really excited to hear what they think too.
I love that, and I love the practicality. And this is something, Paul, we might spend a bit of time getting super practical for our audience, because I think, to your point, the liking principle completely see, completely hear. And I know we talked about Dale Carnegie as another reference point on
how to win friends
and influence people. And
fantastic book.
Well, and the answer to this might just be people need to go and read this. But if I like to try and think, what might someone listening be worried about? And so often when you hear phrases like liking, you think, well, I have to be extroverted and I have to, if everyone likes football, I must also like football. And I'd be really interested for our audience of if there are things, if someone's listening to this, they feel, well, I'm introverted, Paul. I like people, but I don't want to go and knock on the door of the MD of my client and, talk to them about football because I don't have interest. Are there things that they can apply? Actually, is the answer no? You need to learn to liking your client. You need to like what they like as well. How can someone operationalize this in their kind of approach to meeting people and getting liked?
You raise a very, very good point, because I think you can't be, and you can't risk being unauthentic. If you start just to talk about bland things, I wouldn't bother talking about the weather, or people have to say, how was your journey here today? That's fine. It's fine, but it's not great. There's nothing worse than someone pretending to be interested in what you're interested in, and they're not. So I would not go down that route. Again, there have been experiments. So let me give you another one. There was a big thing done about online negotiation, and thousands of people were given a test case. Can you resolve this issue? Can you sort out a deal? And the groups were divided into two. And the first group were just told, look, here's your case study. Go and negotiate. See if you can come up with some sort of agreement. Right? I think they had about a 10% success rate. It was a difficult challenge. 10% managed to get to a deal with both parties. Now, the second group of people were told, look, here's your challenge. Before you spend 10 minutes talking to each other. Talk about what you like. See if you can find any shared interests, common interests. And whatever you like. You go however you want to do it. You're chatting away. Then you try and negotiate the same problem. This had a 50% success rate of resolving it. Just by creating that human bond. Now, what do you want to talk about? Well, again, I wouldn't be inauthentic, but there are things you can do. You could say, a smile, as we talked about earlier, is a very good place to start. There's nothing better. And I used to, I'm a bit weird, and I used to run marathons in my younger days, and used to have to go on these long, boring training runs. And I set myself, I never told anyone this before, by the way. This is genuinely the first time I've ever told this story. But when I used to run down these sort of, down pavements and things, down long roads, I'd pick long, straight roads to run down. I'd obviously occasionally pass people. Now, I would actually work on, can I get a smile out of someone I'm approaching and pass them? And again, I don't mean this I'm obviously running straight past them, but can I get a smile out of them? And I'd work out there was an optimum distance and time that if you looked up at the right time and they looked up at you and you smiled, you could get a smile back. Now, this sounds a bit crazy, but I swear to you, the smiles are infectious. And there's a bit of reciprocity going on here, And then I'd run past them and I'd sort of log down. And what's extraordinary is you get a very, very high hit rate when you work out the timing. You don't want to be approaching 100 yards away grinning as they think you're a madman. Watch out and cross the road. But timed right, a smile is lovely. And I've watched how people behave with me. And it's the universal human way of saying, look, I'm not a threat. And why wouldn't that apply in business as well? The same thing happens. And again, that goes back to the idea of a website, a welcome meeting. It's all part of that connection. And again, this is so easy to do. It's free. Why not do it? As for choosing the right topic, if you have time to search around a bit, you can nearly always find some sort of shared interest. You don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to tell jokes. You don't do any of that. You will just find something that works quite well. But it's worth trying.
Well, and I think your point was it's the 2 ears, 1 mouth that we all get told when we're younger. And I think, as you said, with websites, and it's no different when you're trying to build a business relationship. So often you will see people go in trying to sell themselves to the other person. So, Paul, you'll want to work with me because I have a big firm, I have big offices. And I think, as you're describing, actually understanding where that common ground is, because you're right. It might be that you like football and I like rugby, for a simple metaphor, but actually we have a shared interest in magic. And actually by working through that, we will learn that, get that common ground. And I think that's a great example.
You mentioned football and there's a wonderful psychological experiment that was done a few years ago in a UK university. They wanted to think about loyalty and tribalism. And they conducted this experiment. I'll try and get it right. I may get some of the specifics wrong, but I'm definitely right on the big picture. They wanted to interview hundreds of football fans, and they deliberately chose, I think it was Man United. I hope I'm not wrong on that. And they invited them individually into this university, and they were told they were going to answer some questions on their football team, and they were indeed given questions on Man United and why do you support them and various things and who are your heroes. And then they were all interviewed one at a time. I have to emphasize that. And they were then sent back. Now, actually, that had nothing to do with the real experiment. The real experiment was watching how these particular fans, when they walked back individually back off the campus, would behave if they saw someone a few yards away wearing a different football shirt fall over. Would they go and help them?
Different being a different club.
Different club. So it could be a Liverpool or something, right? And there were other people walking around the campus. It wasn't as though it was just two people around. They wanted to see what the behaviour would be like. And what they found was that if these people had just been asked questions about their club, they were very unlikely to go and help someone who'd fallen over who was wearing a different shirt. They would just keep walking. And there were other people around. It wasn't that the person wasn't going to get help. They weren't leaving someone on their own. It was just, will I go and intervene and make an effort? And I think it was something like, I remember 10 or 15% from memory, something like that, would sort of step over quickly and say, "Are you okay, mate?" or something. The second group of people, again, they were all Man United fans. They were brought in individually, one at a time. But this time their questionnaire they had to fill in wasn't about Man United. It was about football. Why do you like football so much? And it was all about their love of the sport. Same experiment of the fan leaves, goes back. Someone from a different team, wearing a different team shirt, falls over. Obviously, it's all part of the experiment. It's all planned, the right moment, same place, same time. How many people would go over and help this time? And it shot up to something like 50 or 60%. Because they were primed to think about football being their unifying force, not their tribal team. Now, again, this is not actually so much the liking principle. This is the unity principle. So we were talking about shared experiences. That was kind of the get to know you bit. If you can find something that you belong to the same unifying, it could be a club, it could be a sport, it could be anything, you immediately start building a better relationship with somebody. Same area you lived in, grew up in, near Coventry. Wow, what a connection if you meet someone else in near Coventry. The same birth month. It can be something quite tenuous, but you'd be amazed what a difference it makes to just going in cold with somebody if you can find some sort of unity. And it's the unity principle. It's what, again, if liking is one of the 7 principles, unity is funny enough, it was the last one that Robert Cialdini came up with, the 7th principle. So again, it's, listen, these things are all about humanity and about shared experiences or shared identity. And if you can find something, you start to build that relationship pretty damn quickly.
It's a great story and a great example because, to your point, Paul, I think it also helps for anyone who's listening thinking, well, I'm not an avid outgoing person, or I don't watch football. To your point, actually finding that connection. And I guess there's also a little bit in there of bridging the gap. So your world was financial services. And let's say rather than I'm a consultant, you're a banker, actually we are all in the world of financial services. Suddenly we have a unifying theme. I guess maybe to that question, and then I do want to touch on, I think we're naturally moving into, once I've had the relationship and formed it, how do I reduce uncertainty? But before that, I think there is a question of, does the level of unity matter? So let's take that example. You were in asset management and we're talking financial services. Does it matter if actually we are financial services, that's our unity, rather than asset management? Is it better for me to find a specific example, or actually from the science that you've worked through, just having a connection is going to be, if no connection is 0, you've got 80% of the way by having some connection, and actually the level of specificity isn't as important.
I think you're right to say that if you can hone in a bit better, a bit tighter, like imagine concentric circles building outwards. If you can get close to the center, it's going to be easier to find that unity principle much stronger. But it still works, right out the edge. There's one story which I hesitate to tell, but I will, because I think it's in the Cialdini book about. It's a terrible story in one way, but it's about I think the concentration camp in World War II, and one of the guards was asked to shoot 1 in 10 prisoners. They were lined up, and he was going down shooting 1 in 10, and he got to the 10th one, and he looked at the person's face and moved on and shot the next one. And when this later came to light why he'd done it, it's a tragic story. The reason he did was he recognized the person had grown up in the same town as him when he was a boy. Didn't know him, didn't spoke to him. And for some reason that prevented him from doing this horrendous act. Now, there is a bit of the unity principle, albeit in savage, horrid circumstances. So this thing is powerful. And but obviously you want to find happier ones than that when you're dealing in business, but it's a very, very powerful one. Same football team, same church, same club, same county, same birthday. It could be anything. There's a lot of, and that's why I go back to the experiment negotiation. Just by chatting a bit, if you can find anything shared, you immediately way down the road from the eager salesperson that's trying to sell you something.
And there's a piece in there, and to your point, a terrible story, but a poignant example. Everything we have talked about has been almost outside of business. So let's say we're doing a deal or negotiating a consulting project. And again, I ask this more for our audience. What I'm hearing is actually you're as much likely to reap the benefits of this in terms of liking and unity if it's outside of business as in.
Yeah, sometimes it can actually be more help. You can find the connections, and it seems. Well, let me give you an example. So you're absolutely right to highlight the fact that when I first started offering keynotes and training on behavioural science and more latterly on influence and persuasion, when I first started talking, I thought I would just be working with asset management audiences, thinking, well, that's my background. That's what I found pretty quickly was this stuff jumps over all the businesses because it's about how real people make real decisions in the real world. And I found myself, don't ask me how or why, but I ended up doing lots of work with medical teams, with doctors, with the NHS. I also did other businesses. I did lawyers, barristers, procurement agencies, consultancies. And the point is that this is all about human behavior. So it doesn't have to be related to a particular industry. One thing I did find, it's quite funny, is that there was cross-fertilization of stories. And I ended up finding out that if I was talking to a bunch of doctors, they liked hearing about financial issues, mistakes, cock-ups, whatever it may be. And likewise, the other way around as well. Quite reassuring in some ways to hear about mistakes made by other industries, as if yours didn't do that themselves.
Yours is better than that.
I mean, the serious point. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas, which I enjoy doing immensely. But I think this stuff really transcends any individual businesses.
I completely agree. And I think, to your point, those principles, I mean, there's much for life and social settings as business are so important.
Yeah. There's a lovely example I used to tell. I haven't done it for years, but I've just flashed into my head. There was a French cafe owner, and he was concerned that sometimes his customers that came in the morning were a bit grumpy, a bit surly. And he did it as a joke, right? But it looked serious. And he put a big blackboard up in his cafe. And what he did was, I think coffee in those days was $1. You can find the original photograph on the internet. Coffee in those days, it was a while back, was €1.40 from memory. And he wrote up, and it was in French. He said that there were sort of three parts of the menu. That if you just ordered un café, one coffee, it cost you, I think it was €7. Underneath that on the blackboard, it said, un café s'il vous plaît, a coffee please. That went down to €4.25. But underneath that, the third thing was bonjour and café s'il vous plaît, coffee was €1.40. And of course, people come back in and see that if I say, hello, a coffee please, it's only €1.40. If I just go coffee, it's €7. And clearly it's a joke, but you know what? People smiled at it. And he was interviewed afterwards because this became quite well known a few years ago. And he said, no, he said, genuinely, people now are more cheerful. There's a better atmosphere in the cafe. And it all starts off when they walked in and saw that sign. And again, it's a bit of liking, a bit of unity going on there maybe. And again, sometimes in the most trivial examples like that, you see how much common sense and wisdom there is. Why? Because it's how people are hardwired to be. Or certainly pre-wired to be. And I like that. And again, I think these 7 principles, the idea of influence and persuasion, does actually ultimately work off humanity, how we are, not how we should be. Because, of course, if you think about it, if we were all logical, rational, analytical, Spock-like creatures with no emotion, we might make some better decisions that were more efficient. But actually, it would be a pretty horrible, dull place if everyone was like that.
I completely agree, Paul. And I think let's turn to the second part of the 3-part journey we described earlier, because I think we've now given our audience tons of guidance on how to build that relationship, to get that likability, create that unity. That second area you touched on, which is critical in a selling environment or in any client environment, is uncertainty. And the world is uncertain. Buying a consulting project is a big decision. Millions, can be tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds. What could our listeners be doing to help their clients decide they are the right people to work with? What will reduce that uncertainty?
Well, the 2 Cialdini principles that really come into play here are social proof and authority. perhaps to say a little about those. Let's just explain briefly what they are. I mean, I think they're almost self-explanatory because they're probably the two we would use quite a lot naturally. Social proof is the idea that if other people are doing something good, they must know something we don't, or they're already cottoned onto a good idea. I better check it out and perhaps do what they're doing. They know something I don't. Interestingly, I'll just jump ahead, but I don't want to get bogged on this. It's almost a complete paradoxical opposite of one of the other principles, which is scarcity, which is I like something because it's very unique or rare. That's a different psychological angle. But for now, let's think about social proof only. Lots of people are doing something. What do they know I don't? Or they must know something good, or it must be a good idea or a good product. And if you think about it, this is something that's very commonly used now on websites. You get star ratings. I got 5 stars out of 5 or 4.7 stars out of 5 on all thousands of products I've sold. These are useful. This along with things like testimonials and stuff. But of course, a testimonial vets into this idea of authority. If someone I know of authority in that industry, someone really important, it could be someone like a movie star in pop culture. It could be a scientist when it comes to, it could be anybody who you trust. Then a testimonial becomes an authoritative seal of approval, which is very important. And it's particularly in the sort of fashion world. If you have the sort of people you idolize, your generation likes a lot, and they start endorsing something, think of the generation of influencers, then we're getting social proof and authority if it's someone well known. I think these are very interesting because, of course, in the sort of the more traditional businesses, what does authority mean? It means, well, a doctor's white coat, a stethoscope, the certificates on the wall. Very, very important things. You walk into a room and you can immediately, they're credible. A pilot's uniform. Now, I wouldn't want a pilot of a plane to be wearing, leather jacket and jeans. I know it sounds funny, but why don't they? They don't for a perfectly good reason. They want you to know they're smart, they've done the training, they're wearing the uniform, they've got the hat. These things, they look like trappings of power. They're actually very important symbols of responsibility, and it builds immediate credibility, like a certificate on the wall. And so the more you can convey this, if you've won awards, for example, this is a very important way of showing your authority. Anything that enhances your credibility, it's got to be authentic, it's got to be real, it's got to be true. Again, this is about ethical persuasion. But you can do things to make yourself more credible, again, with legitimacy.
What would that look like in today's world? And where I'm coming to, because your point around the pilot, the doctor, you're quite right. I think if a pilot got on a plane and looked like I do today, I'd have questions. And for our listeners who can't see, I'm wearing a quarter zip and jeans, which is perfectly appropriate for this, but not for a pilot. I actually think there's an interesting one, Paul, and this might be too detailed, but a lot of our audience are going to be building relationships virtually. The world has changed. The city, we're in London today, is back, but many people still, the days of suits has passed us to an extent. How can someone show that social proof and authority in a virtual world? You mentioned testimonials, you mentioned websites. Are those the places? Are there any other areas? What would you advise people?
Oh, there's some fantastic ways you could do it with complete authenticity and morality. So, for example, let's say you're having a meeting with someone. Let's say 2 colleagues were going to have a meeting with a potential client. And again, there's lots of science to back this up. This is backed by the data. Introducing someone, even your own client, credentializes them.
Your client, your colleague.
Introducing your colleague to a client.
So if I said, this is Paul.
Yeah, and you give a little bit about my back. If I do it, I might appear cocky or arrogant or a bit big-headed. It actually could undermine. But if you said, and obviously you this is so important. I'm sorry to reiterate. You've got to tell the truth. You're not bigging me up to but if you said, this is, and you talk about their experience or what they're specialised in or something, just a small introduction gives them a lot more credibility. We know this because we've got plenty of feedback about what does and doesn't work when you question people afterwards about, did you like them or not? Did they respond well to them? Now, this is something that I'm amazed. People always introduce themselves at meetings when there's a team of 2. This is a big mistake. You should introduce your colleague, and you can do it with a smile as well. Remember that liking thing? Let me first of all introduce my client, and then the other one can say, let me introduce my client. But in that moment, you actually can say something genuinely true and about the person that credentializes them. Just to give you some examples of how it works in practice, there was a real estate company, a property company a few years ago in London that got in some advice about how their receptionist should answer phones. And what was interesting, that they would have sort of residential property and commercial property, everything. And what would happen is people would ring up and go to the receptionist, and the receptionist would put them through to someone who was available. And what they worked out quickly after having this advice was that you can actually be much more powerful if you say, find out what the query is about, and say, let me put you through to Nick. He's our specialist residential property expert in Kensington. Again, this would have to be true. Now, just by doing that, suddenly you are much more authentic, rather than I'll put you through to somebody. You see, even a small introduction that's genuine gives you a credibility. And the nice thing about this was, because they could monitor this experiment over many months, their business went up by 20% based simply on this.
Just that pre-frame and that credibility.
And because of that credibility. So again, this is giving someone authority. I won't go on stage.
Please.
I sound a bit like a prima donna here. I'm not. If ever I go on stage to do a keynote talk, I will always try to, I hope to, persuade the person to be introduced, rather than just say, well, next up is Paul Craven. Again, I just want to have 2 or 3 facts or figures about me, and it helps me walk on stage with a bit more confidence. But it actually helps the audience as well. This is the other thing to say. Is, remember, you're telling them the truth. It's not just about you being more influential. It's about actually helping the audience. You're helping them by giving them a few facts and figures. So they start off in a better position. So everyone really wins. And again, this is a freebie. So many of these principles are just so cheap to implement. They don't cost lots of money, because again, they're about humanity. And so why wouldn't you do that? My favorite, my little golden tip about authority, since we're on authority, is, and this can be done with a client, it can be done with a colleague, it can be done with a senior colleague, it can be done with a junior colleague, it can be done with a peer. It's really, really good way of conferring authority. Rather than ask for feedback. Well, I mean, this age, it annoys me how many emails I get. Can I have your feedback? And don't ask me for feedback, because if you ask me for feedback, I become a critic, right? Or I could be a critic. Don't ask for feedback. Ask me for advice. Then I'm a partner. If I ask for advice, we're talking about the future, right? If I ask for feedback, it's the past. It's dead. It's gone. I may not even bother to do it. Ask me for advice, right? So think about it. You're in the office. You've got a colleague, right? And you'd like them to help you. Let's say they're the same level as you. Can I ask you your advice? How do you feel as a colleague at your peer? You feel bloody good. This person respects you. Do you? Imagine a senior asking a junior, can I ask you advice? There ain't nothing that junior ain't going to do. Can I ask you advice? How do I get this stuff sorted out by Monday morning? That junior is going to work all weekend to get it done. He or she's just been asked for advice. I mean, asking a senior, can I ask you advice? It works again. I'm recognizing your authority. It works particularly well with clients if done, again, they've got to be done. You can't do this all the time. You can't just chat it out like a parrot. You have to choose your moment. But if you ask a client for advice, you're actually asking to be a co-creator in the project. Now, how different is that to saying, can I have some feedback on this product or whatever? It's a completely different mindset. So I put this under the authority principle. It's to me, it's a golden tip. Ask for advice whenever you can. It works better face-to-face, but even on email, it can be very useful.
I love that. And I'm just thinking about, and it was actually where I'm keen to get your advice on the previous tip you gave, because I love, like you say, if you are trying to persuade a client to work with you, you're in a pitch process or an RFP process. I love the idea of asking for advice to co-create. I want to come back because it's very tactical, and it's Paul, this is as poignant to me as my listeners, your point on introductions, because I think you've just given a great explanation there of actually you can ask anyone for advice and the benefits are always there. You're more senior, you feel like I respect you. You're more junior, you feel like I hear your voice, everything you've just said. I love the introducing piece, and this is because genuinely I have a meeting where I'd like to use it tomorrow, so you can help me. Is how would you recommend, you mentioned there 2 colleagues could actually introduce each other. Are there any pointers around, should that be the more senior introduces the more junior introduces the more senior? Does it not matter at all? And I might be going too detailed, but I would love to know, when I walk into my meeting tomorrow, I'm there with 2 colleagues. Who introduces who and for how much? I
think if there's 3 of you, I think one person introduces the other 2 and then perhaps says a little bit about themselves. Again, I want to impress, when you do these things, if you overdo them, they sound fake, and because they are a bit fake and phony if you keep on doing them. You don't want to overdo any of these principles, certainly not the verbal ones like this. I think in that case, with two colleagues, I would get one person to introduce the other two and then perhaps say something about him or herself briefly. But you see what I'm doing, and point out any specialisms they have. Well, why? What's the benefit to the client of them being there? That's ultimately what you're doing. I mean, ultimately, benefits the client sell. And so if you can get any of those, weave those into the little backstory. And I think that's really important. So that would be my thoughts. Again, there's probably data on it somewhere, but we've seen enough data in the Cialdini Institute to know that this is a really important, simple little thing you can do that makes a huge difference in terms of ultimately generating more business.
If you are listening to this because you want to improve your consultancy or your practice area or just your career, then I want to give you something that will help you supercharge that on top of this, focused on marketing. If you go to our website, createengage.co.uk/insights, you can download our super detailed ROI-driven strategy framework ebook. In that, we go into detail on exactly what you need to do to build an effective marketing strategy, to build a strategy that will deliver you ROI and help you achieve your growth goals. So take that link, download it, and enjoy that after the end of this episode.
I love that, Paul. I think your caution as well is very valid. Like you say, everyone believes it until it seems like it's being put on, and then you lose all of that credibility. And I will message you after my meeting to let you know how that went. And I guess to our final phase, and I think we've got a great journey so far we've built that relationship. We've reduced some of that uncertainty with the social proof you mentioned, with the authority. We are in a world at the moment where the economic climate is tough. Many organizations are slowing down their buying decisions. I know a number of consultancies where that's their number one challenge. It's not top of funnel. It's not getting people in the door. It's Paul. We've been speaking now for 6 months. I would love to know actually how you can motivate people to what is there from a behavioral science perspective that ethically we can use to help people move faster, because ultimately that time kills deals, and if we aren't moving fast, that's going to be hurting a lot of our listeners. What can they be doing?
Well, there are two principles here. There's that again come into play more here than anywhere else in the process, which is scarcity and consistency and commitment. Consistency and commitment is one principle. I think actually of all the 7 principles, consistency and commitment is my favourite one. If I had to pick one. They're all good, but this one is particularly my favourite. And I'll tell you why, because I think it...
And what is it? Define it just for our benefit. Well, it's the one that essentially
comes from within yourself. So the idea basically is that human brains, and we talked about them a little bit in the context of magic and neuroscience earlier, but it's the idea being that we don't like to be inconsistent because it creates what's called cognitive dissonance in our head. In other words, if we say one thing and then we do another... That can be, first of all, we know we'll be seen as being flaky or unreliable by people. And again, a lot of this is built upon how humanity has built up, how civilization has grown, how society norms have evolved. If someone says they'll do one thing and do another, they'd be disregarded and disliked pretty quickly. We like watching people be consistent. In the same way, we're, I think, pre-wired to try and be consistent wherever we can. We don't like cognitive dissonance. We don't like the idea. The famous cognitive dissonance. Aesop was writing about this stuff thousands of years ago, the fox and the grapes. Do you remember that story? The fox is walking along in Aesop's story. He sees a juicy, lovely, beautiful bunch of grapes hanging from a tree. The fox tries to jump up for ages, can't reach it, walks away and says, well, I didn't really want them anyway. Because that's the only way that the fox can resolve its cognitive dissonance, and walks away, I didn't want them anyway. Now, you think about that cognitive dissonance is what we want to try and avoid. And so what the consistency and commitment principle is all about is, if I would like you, for example, to do something that's, should we say, let's call it sort of major, can I help you get to that decision? But it's your decision by asking you, would you do something minor? Because if I can, and you agree to do something minor, and you're happy to do it, again, no no brainwashing, no mind control, just you treat it, then it's easy for me to persuade you to do something bigger. Because you're being consistent, you're not going to create cognitive dissonance. So I'll give you a trivial example, first of all, before we get onto the sensible, the more serious stuff. There was it's in the book, Boy Scouts in the States selling popcorn, right, outside, maybe in the shopping mall. And again, something that you can monitor, how much popcorn do the Boy Scouts sell for charity, and whatever the number is. How do you increase how much popcorn they sell for charity. You don't say, do you want to buy some popcorn? You say, do you support the Boy Scouts? And people will say, yes. So would you like to buy some popcorn? And everyone buys popcorn. My favorite example, and I've tried this myself in different ways and it works so well. If you're assume you're, let's use a London example. You assume you come out of a tube station one day and there's a smartly dressed person, man or woman there with a clipboard, and you know what they're doing. They're going to ask for, they're doing a survey. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I see these people, I sort of pretend I'm on the phone, or I walk the other side of the road, or can you help with the survey? I'll say, sorry, I'm late for a meeting or something. Any excuse not to. But let's assume that they're smartly dressed. You don't feel threatened with them. That someone approaches you with a clipboard. Now, they've actually monitored how many people will stop and help them with a short survey. If someone says, would you help with a short survey? It'll only take a couple of minutes. They reckon it's about 29 to 30%. 30%, let's call it, right? Will stop and help someone if they look nice, come up smart. Will you help with the survey? It won't take long. 30%. Now, you may think, I don't think 30% is a pretty good success rate, but maybe most companies are happy with that. What's interesting is by asking a question first, before you ask the question, will you help with the survey, you ask them a different question. And the question you should ask them in this case is, and this was by the way, this experiment's been conducted, and it's been conducted and replicated many, many times. Ask them first, good morning, sir or madam. May I ask you a quick question? Do you consider yourself a helpful person? You'd be amazed. Something like 95% plus of people will bother to answer and say yes. You say, in which case, would you mind helping with a short survey? And it was originally 29% said they'd help. That now becomes 75%. So that's a 29 to about 165% improvement in your success rate, just by asking that question, would you consider yourself a helpful person first? Now, what's going on here? Let's just think about it. It's the fox and the grapes, okay? It's avoiding, but in this case, you're avoiding cognitive dissonance. You've said you're a helpful person. You're happy to say it. You believe it. You're being authentic. You have chosen to say, I think I'm a helpful person. They then say, well, would you mind helping with a short survey? You can say yes, or you can say no. To avoid cognitive dissonance, it's easy for you to say yes. And by the way, you almost want to say yes because you've just said you're a helpful person. So again, there's no mind control here. You have said you're a helpful person. Fine. I'll prove it that I am. So you see, it's coming from you, not from me. But I've helped you get to that decision by reminding you you're a helpful person. And that's why you can help with my survey.
And I love it as an example. And I remember that one from the book. I also think there's one around putting signs on your lawn, which is a similar thing. And because I'm sure our listeners will wonder, how then does one translate that? If I'm trying to sell to you in a business context, we'll say, you've asked for a proposal. How can I use that? Do I ask you, do you invest in this type of work? Do you invest, do you care about the success of your business? Almost how do you tie it sufficiently? And I know I'm asking for a real detail, but how can I use that in my business if I'm trying to get clients to bridge that gap?
Well, I'll give you a business that did use this. It's not quite the one you send, but again, one thing that I try and do when I'm doing talks or when I'm doing in-house training is I can hopefully offer principles and examples. It's really up to then sitting down together and working out how it applies to you and your specific issue, your challenges. And that's something I love to do. That's where we get able to get more granular. There was a case a few years ago, and it's a good example, this one, because it, again, reminds me of the humanity of people. And I keep coming back to this because I do believe fundamentally in the goodness of people. And I think these principles work on that in a genuinely constructive way, as opposed to anything nefarious or unethical. There was a restaurant in Chicago, I think it was called Gordon's from memory. And they used to have, it was a smart restaurant, nice restaurant. And they used to have a lot of issues with people booking a table and not turning up. And I think at one stage they were getting 30% no-shows. And it would, can I book a table for next Thursday? Yeah, how many people? 4 people. And they wouldn't turn up, for example, 30% of the time. And they tried a psychological experiment. Could they improve? Could they reduce the no-shows? And again, think in business terms. How can you apply this sort of thing to your business? And perhaps we'll come on to talk about that in a second. And of course, the receptionist had a sort of set pattern. Yes, table for Thursday, booked for 8 o'clock. Do let us know if there are any issues or whatever, or fine, phone down, and that's what you know. They tried the experiment then. They got the receptionist to change, to add 2 words, rather than just say, please let us know if you can't make it for any reason. The receptionist had to change the script by adding 2 words only to it. And what she had to do was say, will you please call us if for any reason you can't make the reservation? And then she had to stop talking and wait for the answer, yes. So notice the difference. Please let us know if you can't make it versus, will you please call us if you can't make it? Done. No-shows fell from 30% to 10% because you've got a verbal commitment. And that's why you need to wait for the yes. Because by doing that, you've just got this unsealed, you've got this sort of almost an unsigned contract. The person has consciously said yes. And they will call you if they can't make it. Well, they're much more likely to call you. Again, look, none of these things, I hesitate to, none of these things work all the time, every time. You're just trying to shift the odds in your favor. In most cases, most of the examples I've given you, most of the principles, in fact, all the principles, they're using psychological, ethical techniques that will shift the odds in your favor. No, there's no guarantee of success. But little things like that, saying, will you, and waiting for the word yes. And boom, it works.
Well, I think it's so powerful. And to your point, Paul, these are marginal gains, but it's, we've all heard the British cycling example of the 1%. Those 1% add up, and actually that tacit or that verbal approval, I don't know if it's from Cialdini or from somewhere else, but I always ask it if you need the loo on a train, I'll always ask the person across from me Paul, will you just look after my laptop? And as I say, I can't remember if it was that book or another, but
there's a famous YouTube video on it. I think the film is taken, it's a very grainy old YouTube film. I'll try and think of the name of the person. It was on a beach in, I think it was New York or somewhere back in the 60s. And they experimented, I think was left a radio on the beach, and it's all being filmed on these grainy pictures. But the video is brilliant. You have to watch it. And in one set of scenarios, the person just ostentatiously left a radio on a beach towel and walked away. And there were lots of people around that saw the person do this. And then someone else comes, all part of the experiment, or picks up the radio and walks away with it. No one got up to help, right? Sort of the bystander effect, if you like. In the second set of experiments, the person who puts the radio down just says to one of their neighbours, excuse me, would you mind just watching my little towel and stuff there? I'll be back in 5 minutes. And then in comes the supposed thief in nearly every case. And gets the answer yes, right? In nearly every single case, the person would challenge the person that's just walked with the radio. That verbal commitment, it's so powerful. Costs nothing.
I love it, Paul. I love it. Well, Paul, I think that gives us, there's so much we could cover here, and I'm conscious time is always the enemy of podcast. And I think, as you've highlighted already, people can go and read Influence. There's probably, Paul, around 2 of this where we go into the other principles, because I know we've left a lot uncovered for our audience. But I think we've covered there some really interesting areas. If I look at actually that journey of building a relationship, reducing that uncertainty, and actually motivating someone to act, I think we've given, and I say you have given some fantastic tips. And I really want to echo what you've highlighted. Actually, in a world where we all think about how much things cost, all of the things you've talked about today cost nothing. Obviously, I need the time to build it into a process or put it on a website, but actually those things cost nothing. And so I would love to turn actually to the final questions of today. And this is, Paul, one that I've been dying to ask you, and you have teased me masterfully. I think the first thing when we sat down for lunch, what was it, 3 hours ago, you said, I love the questions and the book is the one, it's changed my life. And you encouraged me to leave time to ask about the book. So normally this is a question that I ask very much at the end, but I want to ask to understand, do put me out of my misery. What is the book that has changed your life? Because that is how it was billed to me. So what you said earlier around your colleagues, you have built this book up to me. I now want to read it. Tell me what it is.
I did say that because it's true. Before I mention the book, and I'm not trying to keep everyone hanging, the book I often give away to friends and family is actually Cialdini's Influence book. And actually he's done a second book, Persuasion, 2016, which is masterful as well. And I would encourage anybody to...
I've not read Persuasion.
Persuasion. It's essentially the idea of how can you get people in the right mindset before you persuade them. It's a different topic. So before you use the 7 principles, and again, something I talk about in my talks and training is the persuasion concept alongside the The 7 Principles. And those 2 books are absolutely wonderful. And you mentioned it earlier, you read it a while back, but the original book in 84, Influence, has been expanded and amended numerous times since then. It's a much bigger book now than it was then. But I would assure any listeners it's very readable. You skip through the pages very quickly and you want more, and you end up going on to sort of online looking at Robert Cialdini's podcasts and videos and stuff on YouTube. Watch out the rabbit hole it sends you down. But the onset to the book and those 2 books would be the ones I would typically give away to friends and family, because it's not just a business thing. This is really important to perhaps finish with this topic. It's about life and connecting and communicating with fellow human beings, whether they be businesses, whether they be friends or family, or indeed enemies. I mean, this thing is useful. So the 2 Cialdini books. The book that I read it, I think when it first came out in about 2008, but I didn't really appreciate it then. It took me a second chance of reading it 2 or 3 years ago. It was by Dr. Ian McGilchrist. And Dr. McGilchrist read a book called The Master and His Emissary. And again, won't surprise you to know it's about the human brain. It's about the mind. It's about consciousness. But it's so much more than that. And essentially, McGilchrist was initially a psychiatrist. He's also a philosopher, an aesthete. He's a polymath. He understands something, but his background is in his job. For most of his life was as an expert in the human mind and human brain as a psychiatrist. And the book is called The Master and His Emissary. And I couldn't do it justice in an hour, let alone in a couple of minutes. But I'll give you a very, very, very brief, poor synopsis of it. But I'd recommend, if you don't attempt the book, it's quite a thick book. It's worth it. But you can see lots of Dr. McGilchrist on YouTube videos and podcasts, and he's done lots of them, which may be more accessible to a lot of your friends and colleagues. Certainly in my case it has, but it's the book I give out, The Master's Emissary. And what the book is about, there's sort of biology at the beginning of the book about how the human mind does work. And essentially he goes into a topic that has been the subject of much pop science over many years. But unlike the pop science, which is largely wrong on it, McGilchrist has studied the human mind as a psychiatrist, and has come up with the conclusion that why do we have a left and right hemisphere? If the brain is all about connection, why are they separate things? And this applies to all mammals and all animals as well. Why is it connected by a thing called a corpus callosum, which is actually more of an inhibitor than a bridge? And based upon working and dealing with many patients in his life, some of whom have had damage to their left hemisphere, meaning they're only really using their right hemisphere, and vice versa, he has come to the conclusion that whilst most of the brain does most of the same things, it's not what they do, it's how they do it. So, for example, and I'll keep this brief, the left hemisphere is very much about apprehending, grabbing, grasping, taking transactions, dare I say, to cue into another comment. The right hemisphere is more about awareness, context, the environment, dare I say, relationships. And once you start to see all the extraordinary medical examples he gives of people how they behave if they are not using their right hemisphere or they're not using their left hemisphere, how completely differently they behave, you start to realize that actually his thesis is probably spot on, that the right hemisphere is the master, it's the one in control, the left hemisphere is the servant or the emissary that should be the one that's subordinate. But what this book does is explore slowly in this fascinating way how over history, civilizations move between being more right hemisphere or more balanced, let's say, using both. And he highlights, for example, times like ancient Greece, where a lot of philosophy, art, culture, the Roman Empire, some of it, the Renaissance, very much balancing the left and right hemispheres. And there are cycles, by the way, in all this. It's not simply a straight line where the left hemisphere becomes dominant. Now, what does that mean again? That's about being very that's about apprehending. It's about grabbing and getting and grasping. And what he and indeed many people now agree with him, and that we currently live in an age where the left hemisphere is dominating a lot of our thinking. Where, social media, for example, exacerbates binary thinking. The right hemisphere loves nuance. It loves paradox. It loves the idea to think about the whole thing. The left hemisphere wants a simple, straight answer all the time, and it wants it now. Right? The right hemisphere is more in touch with the sacred, poetry, music. The left hemisphere, the beat of a drum, now. And what he talks about in the book is and again, I can't do it justice in what I'm saying. Please listen to his podcasts, his YouTube videos, or read the book. Essentially, if there's a danger that society becomes too left hemisphere orientated, and it's a very, very dangerous slope. And just to finish, for me, I said it changed my life, reading this book. That's just one aspect of the book. The book tells you about lots of things about the sides of the hemisphere. He followed up with an even bigger tome a couple of years ago called The Matter of Things, which is actually a much more philosophical book, much more delves into things like goodness, beauty, and truth, and all the things I think are really important once you let your right hemisphere realize how important they are. And it's got me into classical music. It's got me into an appreciation of the sense of the sacred. It's got me into an awareness that some of the greatest things that have ever been done have been done through intuition and imagination. You see, this world's obsessed now with science and reason. And McGilchrist says, in fact, I think this is in the second book, The Matter of Things, there are 4 ways to the truth. Science, reason, imagination, and intuition. Now, science and reason are good. That's left hemisphere thinking. That's logical, analytical, in many ways. But what he argues is a lot of this comes from the right hemisphere. A lot of scientific discovery is intuition and imagination. The best literature is imagination and intuition, and so on and so forth. And what we need to do is have the 2 hemispheres working in balance. We need the apprehending bit to sort of get our food. We need the comprehending bit to avoid being eaten if we're an animal. All animals have the left and right hemisphere as well. But once you take this beyond just the eating and think about how you approach life, look at life, things that matter to you, you realize that what really matters in life is what the right hemisphere appreciates. And the left hemisphere is much more transactional. And the right hemisphere is about relationships. It's about nature. It's about all aesthetics. It's about the good things in life that we really, truly value. Goodness, beauty, and truth, perhaps being 3 obvious ones. But we forget about them in the hurly-burly of the modern day world at our peril.
I love that, Paul. And I'm glad we saved that. And it is something having fallen victim probably more often than I care to admit to left hemisphere thinking, I'm going to go read that because I'm sure I could benefit from more right hemisphere. And I think you're right. I think a world of balance is what we need. So thank you. And I also must say, with books, I love getting a non-business example as well, because I think whenever a book has had an impact, as clearly this one has, that's something that I love to read. I know my listeners love to read. And so thank you for that. I will go and read that and I will let you know what I think of it.
Well, thank you very much indeed for having me.
Well,
it's been a great pleasure.
Not at all, Paul. It has been great. Thank you for this. If anyone wants to find out more about yourself, they want to find out more about your work, the Cialdini Institute, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
Probably the best place is on LinkedIn, actually. Paul Craven on LinkedIn. I'd welcome any personal messages and I'll respond to anybody. And thank you for any interest you may have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. This has been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know you have places to be after this, so please enjoy and all the best for the rest of your week.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Cheers, Paul.
Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And, I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.